The email arrived at 8:41 a.m. Urgent board meeting. Attendance required. I assumed it was another quarterly update, perhaps another expansion announcement. I ironed my shirt, grabbed my notes, and walked to the boardroom I had helped furnish years ago. Oak table, frosted glass panels, and the framed mission statement I wrote when the company was still a startup with ambition instead of ego. At 9:07 a.m., they were already seated. No smiles. No greetings. The room felt colder than the air conditioning should allow. A junior HR representative I barely recognized cleared her throat and began reading a script. It was mechanical, detached, and poorly rehearsed. She mispronounced my name twice, stumbled over my job title, and avoided looking at me altogether. 12 years of system building, sleepless nights, and crisis management reduced to a dry paragraph that could have been written for any stranger. The CEO watched silently, tapping his pen, as if eager for the moment to be over. When the escort stepped forward, I realized they expected emotion, outrage, negotiation, maybe even begging. They got none. What nobody in that room understood, despite the files I built, the contracts I drafted, and the laws I enforced, was that I wasn't a cog. I was the axle. Every license, every permit, every federal authorization bore my signature as responsible officer. Without me, their billion-dollar empire had no legal right to operate. I didn't need to threaten them. The law already had. I walked out slowly, passing the portraits of executives who believed charisma outweighed competence. My mug remained on my desk, still warm from the coffee I never finished. They thought they fired an employee. In reality, they had just removed the only person keeping their corporate heartbeat legally alive. Compliance wasn't a department. Compliance was me. In the early years, when the company was still fighting for relevance, they treated compliance as if it were a minor inconvenience, a stack of documents to be signed between negotiations and celebratory lunches. I remember late nights drafting submissions to regulators while executives took photos beside oversized checks and congratulated themselves for deals I made possible. They enjoyed the spotlight, but the foundations of their empire were built on signatures, mine, inked quietly in rooms they never stepped into. Every expansion into new territories required government approval. Every partnership with foreign entities demanded certifications, audits, and legal guarantees. They rarely asked how those approvals materialized. They assumed paperwork was a clerical detail handled by invisible hands. The truth was far more fragile. My credentials weren't decorative. They were mandatory. Without my authorization, their factories had no right to produce, their software couldn't operate, and their logistics network lacked the legal clearance to move goods across borders. When HR terminated my contract, they believed they were cutting costs, trimming excess, removing a relic of the past. What they actually did was erase the responsible officer from every license the company depended on. Within hours, automated systems flagged inconsistencies. Government portals flashed warnings. Compliance dashboards shifted from green to red, not out of malice, but because law acknowledges individuals, not memories. No dramatic confrontation was needed. No anonymous email. No sabotage. The structure I created folded under its own rules the moment my name disappeared. The irony was poetic. For years, they claimed employees were replaceable. The system disagreed. It didn't want charm, speeches, or slogans. It wanted the certified authority it recognized. And now that authority was gone. Their empire wasn't collapsing because I was angry. It was collapsing because legally I no longer existed. 48 hours after my exit, the company's confidence began to fracture. Production sites reported an unexpected halt in their operating systems. Machines that had run flawlessly for years refused to start. Logistics hubs received alerts preventing them from dispatching goods. At first, executives brushed it off as a temporary outage, a routine IT hiccup. But the word routine vanished rapidly once the compliance dashboard switched from yellow to crimson, flashing warnings they had never bothered to understand. Calls poured in from partners across 3 continents. Some were confused, others furious. Government agencies demanded updated certifications and the identity of the responsible signatory. There wasn't one. My name, once dismissed as a mere formality, was suddenly the missing keystone holding their corporate arch together. Without it, entire transactions became illegal overnight. Contracts worth millions stalled mid-execution. Warehouses full of inventory sat untouched, unable to be moved without proper authorization. Meetings turned chaotic. Managers shouted at IT departments, convinced a cyber attack was underway. Engineers rebooted systems repeatedly, only to face the same message: authorization required. It was not code causing the failure, it was compliance. A vacancy. A silent absence with louder consequences than any strike or protest. Executives tore through old emails, searching for backups, substitute permissions, anything that could serve as a placeholder. The law offered none. It didn't matter how many degrees the new hires had or how confident the CEO appeared on camera. Law is deaf to ego. It only asks one question: who is accountable? And the last documented answer pointed to a man they escorted past security as if he were disposable. They cursed the system. They cursed the regulators. Some whispered of sabotage, others of supernatural interference. But ghosts don't shut down corporations. Paperwork does. And this time, the paperwork was gone. While I was settling into my first uninterrupted weekend in years, the boardroom I once sat in became a battlefield. They assembled emergency committees, dragged directors from vacations, and summoned consultants who charged more per hour than my monthly salary. Whiteboards filled with arrows, acronyms, and desperate timelines. Yet despite the noise, they danced around the one fact no one wanted to say out loud. They had amputated the very limb that held the company upright. The consultants delivered glossy reports filled with technical jargon and strategic recommendations. None of them addressed the core issue. The lawyers, expensive, confident, impeccably dressed, searched frantically for a loophole allowing them to continue operations without a certified signatory. Their conclusion was blunt and devastating. There was no legal workaround. Regulation is not a suggestion. It is a gate. And I was the gatekeeper. Executives suggested appointing a replacement, but compliance laws don't transfer like passwords. The responsible officer must be vetted, approved, and documented through procedures that take months. There is no emergency version. There is no express lane. Their empire had been built on the quiet assumption that my presence was guaranteed, like electricity, unnoticed until missing. As tension mounted, voices rose. Someone slammed a binder. Another accused HR of negligence. HR blamed finance. Finance blamed the CEO. The CEO blamed unexpected circumstances, refusing to admit his own decision had triggered the implosion. They passed blame like a hot coal, never realizing the fire had already spread. Every meeting ended the same way: confused, exhausted faces staring at a problem they couldn't outsource. They had spent millions chasing shortcuts, yet the truth remained immovable. Without the original signatory, there was no legal operation. Their downfall wasn't engineered. It was authorized the moment they erased the only name the law trusted. On the fourth day, I was making coffee when my phone buzzed. The screen showed an unknown number, no country code, no name, just silence waiting to be answered. I almost ignored it, assuming it was another recruiter trolling LinkedIn profiles. But something in my gut told me to pick up. The voice on the other end was calm, deliberate, and unmistakably accustomed to power. It wasn't a manager. It wasn't HR. It was the investor. The man whose photo they flashed proudly at conventions, whose presence alone inflated their valuation, and whose approval they treated as divine endorsement. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. No scripted apologies. No awkward explanations. He spoke like a man already holding the autopsy report. "I need clarity," he said. "Is it true the company no longer meets regulatory status because your name is gone? Not your role, not your documentation, your name." He understood what the board never did. Systems recognize authority, not personalities. My answer was a single, unadorned word: yes. For a moment, nothing moved. No breath, no sigh, no attempt at negotiation. Just silence, thick, calculating, expensive silence. He wasn't shocked. Shock is emotional. He was processing the mathematics of disaster. Stalled contracts, frozen capital, government sanctions, and a billion-dollar valuation now dangling by a thread tied to a signature they had thrown away like trash. Then, in a tone void of anger yet carved in steel, he asked for my address.
Note my resume.
Not my availability. My location. Investors don't visit problems, they inspect assets. The board had fired a liability they invented. The investors saw the truth they ignored. By the time the call ended, I understood something profound. The company hadn't lost a name. It had lost its legal oxygen. And someone finally realized who controlled the air. The sun had barely broken through the clouds when headlights swept across my driveway. A black executive sedan, polished enough to reflect the morning sky, rolled to a halt. I hadn't scheduled a meeting. Yet 3 board members stepped out as if summoned by gravity, not authority. Their suits were immaculate, but their faces told the truth: exhaustion, fear, and the dawning realization that power is not a title, it is infrastructure. They didn't ring the bell. They didn't knock. They stood there waiting for a man they once escorted past security as though he were a disposable employee. Now they addressed me like a gatekeeper who controlled access to oxygen. Their spokesman began with a speech rehearsed in panic. He spoke of misunderstandings, unforeseen consequences, and strategic misalignment. It might have been convincing months ago, but desperation has a scent, and there's reeked of collapsing deadlines and frozen revenue streams. The investors' call had shattered whatever illusion of control they clung to. Then came the offers. My former job title, once dismissed as operational clutter, was suddenly essential to corporate continuity. The salary I used to justify through reports and results was now flexible to accommodate my expectations. They dangled numbers like keys, believing money could rewind a decision carved into compliance law. But I didn't return for numbers. I returned for terms. Not revenge, respect. Respect codified, notarized, and immune to ego. Respect that didn't evaporate when bonuses were threatened. Respect that outlived applause. I laid out my conditions calmly: autonomy, oversight authority, veto power, and the final say on regulatory engagements. They didn't negotiate. They signed. The irony was surgical. When they fired me, they believed they owned the building. Now they understood the truth. I own the doors. The negotiation didn't take hours. It took clarity. While they stumbled through explanations about corporate strategy and internal restructuring, I slid a document across the table that redefined the company's power structure. There were no raised voices, no legal threats, and no emotional theatrics. Just ink, logic, and consequences, 3 forces sharper than any revenge plan. First, I eliminated the concept of a salary. Salaries can be frozen, reassigned, or justified away in budget cycles. Equity, however, is permanent. It grows when the company grows and bleeds when incompetence takes the wheel. They agreed without hesitation, too desperate to grasp the implications. Next came veto rights over expansion. They once treated new markets like trophies, ignoring the labyrinth of regulations behind them. Now nothing moved unless I approved it. Not a product launch, not a territory, not a handshake on a stage. Ambition without oversight became impossible. Then I claimed full authority over compliance. Every certification, every renewal, every operational signature. The very department they once dismissed as administrative noise now controlled the oxygen supply of the corporation. Board members exchanged glances, but no one objected. They were signing their reflections, each clause revealing how blind they had been. Finally came the golden clause: irrevocability. My position could not be restructured, reassigned, or removed, not without triggering immediate shutdown across all regulated activities. In other words, firing me again wasn't just expensive, it was impossible. When the last signature dried, they looked relieved, believing the crisis was over. What they didn't realize was chilling. They never fired me. They upgraded me into the one role the law recognized as irreplaceable. The agreement didn't punish them.
It exposed them.
And for the first time, they saw the company for what it had always been: a machine powered by the man they tried to discard. Today, my workday no longer begins with agendas, presentations, or performance reviews. I don't sit through meetings filled with buzzwords and recycled enthusiasm. My calendar holds a single responsibility: deciding which opportunities the company is legally permitted to pursue. I don't participate in discussions, I authorize destinies. I became the quiet pulse of the organization, the signature behind every decision that breathes life into its operations. They once laughed at the idea that anyone was irreplaceable. They saw employees as moving parts, cheap, interchangeable, and easily discarded. In their arrogance, they believed power lived in corner offices and embossed business cards. They were wrong. Power lives where consequences reside. They fired a man they assumed was merely occupying space. They never considered he was the architecture holding the space together. Their mistake wasn't the termination itself. It was the assumption that my departure marked an ending. What they perceived as closure was, in truth, ignition. By removing me, they didn't cut ties, they severed the umbilical cord connecting them to legal existence. Regulations don't mourn. They don't debate. They simply enforce the rules already written in ink they never bothered to read. As for the investor, the one they worshipped like a deity at conferences, his allegiance shifted without drama. Billionaires don't chase chaos. They invest in stability. And I am stability personified. The calls he once made to the board now come directly to me. Not for updates. For approval. The company still moves, but only because I allow the gears to turn. My revenge didn't roar. It whispered. It didn't destroy them, it redefined me. They took a job from a man they underestimated. I reclaimed a throne they never recognized. In the end, silence didn't just win. Silence became the law.